Thank you very much for having me here. How many of you in this room are mothers? Okay, and thank you. How many of you know a mother? Okay, great. So put an image in your head, if you are a mother, of where you had your baby. And if you're not a mother, of having visited someone in a hospital, and I want you just to have that image. I'm an OBGYN, and I had delivered thousands of babies in this country before finding out that 500,000 women around the world die from complications of pregnancy and childbirth. It was something that I had always considered a very joyous event, and I never associated it with death. But when I realized that every day the equivalent of 2 747 jets filled with pregnant women crash to the ground, that's how many women are dying every single day, I felt that there was something I wanted to do about it. My organization is called WeCare Solar, and I'd like to take you on the journey that brought me to really trying to create a linkage between the role of energy access and maternal health. Lights. So imagine for a moment that you're not living in the Bay Area. Imagine that you're one of the 15 million women this year who develop a complication during pregnancy, but you're living in a small village in Africa that has a dirt floor, there's no running water, there's no electricity, you haven't had prenatal care, the nearest health center is quite far away, but even without any experience, you realize after 2 days of being in labor that something is really wrong. And though your family earns less than $2 a day, they somehow pull together the resources to get you transportation, to bring you to the nearest health facility, where you bang on the door, a midwife ushers you in. She looks at you, tries to understand why you're bleeding so heavily. She wants to know if your baby is still alive or not. She's trying to think of how she can contact a doctor who can perform a C-section to save your life. And this is the only light available in the health center. This is the grim reality for millions of women around the world. It's part of the reason why women like these in sub-Saharan Africa have a 1 in 38 chance of dying during their reproductive years from something, as I mentioned, that we consider quite joyous in this country. And before I went to Africa, I thought maybe they're dying from very rare conditions or unusual infectious diseases, but no, they're dying from complications that I had treated for years in this country, but it never resulted in death. These are preventable causes of mortality, things like hemorrhage, which is bleeding, infection, eclampsia, which is a high blood pressure related condition, or obstructed labor, which simply means your baby's too big to fit. So why are so many women dying from something that we know how to treat? Well, part of the reason is that many of these women are poor and they try and deliver at home. So when complications arise, they may not get the care they need right away. But part of the reason lies in the health facilities themselves, for even when they arrive to seek care, they may be unable to access procedures that could save their lives. After years as a practicing physician, I actually had my own injury. I injured my back and I could no longer provide obstetric care to people in Berkeley, which is where I was living. And after a year of rehabilitation, I went back to school. I went to study public health, and that's where I learned the statistics that I've already shared with you. And at a certain point, I was invited to go to Nigeria to study why so many women were dying even within health facilities. And so this is a photo from 2008 when I was visiting a large hospital in northern Nigeria. This hospital was a state hospital serving a city of 1.5 million people. And I spent 10 to 14 hours in this room. Do you know what this is? It's labor and delivery. So this is where women who fail to deliver at home, who have many complications, would arrive, maybe being on a metal table. If they were lucky, there'd be a piece of plastic there, but none of the bright lights, monitors, even privacy to which I was accustomed to serve these women. And there was another problem. The hospital did not have electricity for 12 hours a day. What would it mean to be a hospital without electricity? It means that if they did need a C-section, the surgery needed to be conducted by the ambient light of windows rather than using the overhead light that was in the operating theater or other things like the suction machine or cautery machine. It meant that if someone came in bleeding and needed a hemorrhage, needed a transfusion, they couldn't rely on a blood bank refrigerator because that requires steady electricity. And rather, they needed to bring family members who could be tested to see if they could be suitable donors before they could get life-saving blood. It meant that if a woman had a complication, such as this one where she has a placenta previa, the placenta is blocking the birth canal, she was bleeding, she needed an emergency C-section, there was no immediate communication system, no landlines, no cell phones, because those all require electricity as well. And a messenger would run around the hospital compound seeing if they could find help. In this case, it took more than 4 hours to find a doctor, and by the time the doctor was summoned, she had lost her baby. And I saw that situation repeatedly. And finally at night, this is what the maternity ward looked like. If you could turn on the lights, you'd see that there are dozens of patients in a room behind this midwife. There's babies, there's family members, and everybody is in darkness. It was on a night like this that I was in that same labor and delivery room that I showed you, in utter darkness, watching a woman with a condition called eclampsia fighting for her life. She had very high blood pressure, her baby was still alive, but her lungs had filled up with fluid, and every time she took in a breath, I could hear her rattling, and I said, she's gonna die while I'm here. Why am I here right now witnessing this? And I realized that even though I was an OBGYN with a great education in public health, I had no idea the situation was this bad. I said, these women are dying in silence. Maybe I'm here to be a voice to help tell their stories. So I began to write home, and I sent letters to my husband, who was in the Bay Area creating solar education programs for youth. And he had an idea. He said, why don't we design a solar electric system to support the hospital? And he went about designing a system that would be easy to maintain, that would have fluorescent lights and backup LED lights, and he created this great diagram. And I said, you know, I'm really intrigued by this. Can you make some kind of a demonstration kit that I can bring back to show my Nigerian colleagues? And I said, please make it small enough to fit in my suitcase. I have to pass through the airport in Abuja, and I don't want to be stopped at customs. So he created this mini kit that I could fold inside my suitcase and take with me, and I brought it back, and they loved it. We brought walkie-talkies that could be powered off the solar. We brought in lights. We brought in headlamps, and they said we could use this immediately. I said, no, you're going to get a much bigger system. We continued to do fundraising, brought in a bigger system for the hospital. The operating theater went from this to looking like this with only 5 watts of electricity, 15 watts of electricity. We also lit up the maternity ward, the labor room. We brought in a blood bank refrigerator using solar power. And over the next year, the number of deaths in that hospital for women went down by 70%. And the hospital was no longer turning away women at night. And honestly, I thought we were done. I didn't have a company. This was like a side project I did as I was doing my studies as a graduate student at UC Berkeley. But other people came to me and said, why are you only focusing on the hospital? We're in need as well. Can't you bring us solar electricity? And so what began at that moment was a process where my husband and volunteers would make these prototype little cases like the ones I had brought as a demonstration kit so that we could serve clinic by clinic, bringing in a small but essential amount of electricity to provide lighting and mobile communication. Well, demand grew. More and more people heard about us, and if you had visited us in those days, that's what my backyard looked like. It became an assembly line for creating these solar electric kits, and the demand kept growing. And with the help of foundations, we were able to then start building these. And this is now where we make these in Fremont, California, serving hundreds of health facilities at a time. So what does it mean now to have electricity? The solar Suitcase has a very robust unit. It has a lot of the same components of that very first system that Hal designed. It has solar panels, a battery charge controller, but it has also highly efficient appliances. So we make our own special lights that are specifically designed for medical procedures. We bring in a fetal monitor, we bring in headlamps, and we also make it compatible with other high efficiency devices. And with the solar Suitcase, we now do provide light to health centers in many parts of the world. You can see that the solar case actually becomes a cabinet that can be fixed on the wall for more permanent installations. It's being used to charge cell phones to provide a source of communication when health workers need help. It also has the fetal monitor that I told you about. It has a suction device so that babies can be resuscitated. And it even has a light that can be attached to that non-functional light that's over so many operating tables in Africa and elsewhere. But the technology alone is not enough. We needed to have an educational program, and so for this, we began training health workers so that they could know how to use the solar suitcase and to maintain it over time. And as we began to teach the health workers, we realized a lot of people in villages had never seen electricity, so sometimes we had quite a large audience for this. And as we scaled, we needed more teachers, and so we began to train the health workers themselves to be the educator, to go from clinic to clinic. And soon, they became the people that were doing the installations. So this, for example, is a nurse who had always wanted to be involved in solar. And again, demand grew, and so we created a women's solar ambassador program to get women to be the ones, not only to be the beneficiaries, but to be the change makers themselves. So these women go around leading training programs around the world right now to empower people to become their own installers and maintainers and teachers of other health workers. And often there's large celebrations where we go. We try and get community ownership. We've seen dances. People have made up songs about this. People are doing dramatizations, and it's quite wonderful to see. Now, how do we reach so many health centers? We do it through partners. Partners that are already working to strengthen healthcare, but may not have thought about the element of energy access. So for example, we might work with UNICEF that's doing a project in Uganda to reach 50 health centers at a time. And as we've grown, we now have reached 1,800 health centers. And in most of these programs, we actually are working in partnership with the kind of groups I mentioned. As an example, in Ethiopia, we worked with Hamlin College of Midwives, training midwives in midwifery school about solar electricity, and then providing solar suitcases in the very health centers that they're being stationed in. And in Ethiopia, so far, we have more than 200 health centers that have this form of lighting. We've also seen that the solar suitcase can go beyond just maternal health care, and it can be very important after natural and medical disasters. So for example, you all know about Ebola hitting West Africa. Imagine for a moment that a lot of these health workers did not have a form of light at night. How were they able to screen people? How could they care for them or give them medications? So we began to provide solar suitcases in this situation. And after the earthquake that was in Nepal, we got back this picture from one of our partners. Someone carrying a solar suitcase on his back in order to reach this clinic at night that had no light. And we realized we needed to do something after this emergency, and that there were 126,000 pregnant women after that emergency who still needed care, and many of their health facilities had been destroyed. So we began to send solar suitcases in partnership with the group One Heart Worldwide to reach more than 110 health facilities in this country, so that babies could be born safely even as the country tries to rebuild. I'm going to finish with one last story to show you even the power of one suitcase. The man in the orange t-shirt is a doctor from the DR Congo. He received one of our solar suitcases, and I asked him to please call me as soon as he got to the DR Congo so that I could answer any questions he might have about this technology. And I waited for weeks and he didn't call, and I thought maybe the suitcase was confiscated at customs, he's afraid to call me. When he finally called, he offered his apologies, and he said, "The night that I arrived, I was able to deliver a woman with twins successfully, but the next day there was an outbreak of cholera. And for the next 30 days, I took care of 122 mothers, fathers, and newborns with this dreaded disease." He said, "In the past, I would lose 50% of my patients to cholera, and 80% of those deaths happened at night." He said, "For the first time in the history of our village, nobody died." And he said, "We are witnessing," thank you, "we are witnessing what light means in communities where night means death to those in need of emergency care once the sun goes down." So at the beginning, I asked you to imagine that world of darkness with the kerosene lantern. Now I want you to imagine a world of light, a world where every health center has a way to access clean, renewable energy, where mothers no longer need to come to a health center bringing a candle or kerosene as part of their health, as part of their birthing kit, where women no longer fear dying like in Malawi, where the word pregnancy means between life and death. That's a literal translation for the word pregnancy. So a world where all women can consider birth to be joyous as well. There's a lot of incredible people in this room, and I'd like to invite any of you who are really interested in joining us to please consider partnering us. There's lots of ways to get involved. We're going to be starting a campaign soon called Light Every Birth. We're looking for people who would like to sponsor clinics, who would like their organizations to get involved, or who would like to help us spread this campaign so that we can really work for a better tomorrow. Thank you so much.